The COP28 climate summit is underway. It's on its second day in Dubai, and French President Emmanuel Macron is one of the many world leaders attending. He is speaking live.
The status has almost changed. The private actors in our countries must also commit. I welcome the launch of the Lawn Planet Data Hub, which allows us to compare the decarbonisation path of 400 of the biggest companies. Moreover, emerging countries must phase out carbon, and that's the second big fight for us. Now, if there's a top priority, that is for the emerging countries phase out carbon. Effectively, we must allow developing countries to catch up economically. That's an element of justice, but that catch-up must not be done on the basis of fossil fuels, especially coal, and for a simple reason, and that is today existing plants that are concentrated chiefly in Asia, which will emit enough CO2 to exceed, for us, that will exceed the 1.5-degree target. So while each year we must draw down our fossil fuel-based energy production, just as I speak, we have 500 gigawatts of new coal capacities that are being planned. And you have an absurdity as we speak, a true absurdity to choose coal. And so we need to make a complete U-turn on this subject. First, the G7 countries must set the example. I commend my colleague, Sunyo, who is here with us and who presided this club, who is very courageous on this subject. But the G7 must set the example and commit to putting an end to coal at home before others. So before 2030, France will live up to its commitment to completely close all its plants by 2027 under my own mandate. I can't promise what will happen after me, but that's what I can promise for now. Then the richest countries must also help the developing countries also to phase out coal. Since Glasgow, the G7 has committed close to $50 billion in just transition energy partnerships. The JETP with Indonesia, Vietnam, South Africa, these are good methods. They must be pursued and disseminated to help the coal phase out. But this also means we must be consistent. We must therefore stop subsidizing new coal power plants. The G20 committed to this in Rome in 2021, but we must change the rules when it comes to private financing. As I speak, the private sector has no disincentive to finance a coal plant as opposed to a renewable. That's absurd, and therefore our private markets, our investment systems are massively dysfunctional, and it's really shocking for everyone. Therefore, we must overhaul the system. In the next few years, there must be one rate of interest, if you like, for green and one rate of interest for brown. And if there is one priority for the funders to ensure consistency, it would be to differentiate that rate of interest, which is a major spread because it doesn't integrate the climate risk. And as the way we look at investment today, we're in no way considering properly how we are funding assets which will have depreciated in a few years' time, which are completely inconsistent with our global strategy. We're going to launch this with the World Bank and our partnerships as part of the Coal Transition Accelerator Initiative, which we're launching tomorrow. A third remark, we must commit to placing trade policy for the benefit of the environmental transition. This is another aberration that I want to put on the table here, because we invest in greening our industries at a global, regional level, but at the same time we continue to liberalize pollutant goods around the planet as if nothing was happening. That's very discouraging, and it's a lose-lose option. I want to say clearly, we do need major efforts in Europe, for example, to decarbonize industry and agriculture. If we continue to have the same trade agreements that we had in the 1980s, 1990s, sometimes agreements that were negotiated over that period that allow us to allow countries to go back to using coal, and then what's the point? Then our producers won't follow us. They'll be right, because so what we must have is a system that allows us to engage everyone on the same strategy. I think we must integrate in the WTO rules our climate rules. We need to bring them into the system, and therefore we need to completely overhaul in that system and integrate a climate clause into the WTO to align our trade regimes with the Paris Accords. And there are a few technical but essential points in that respect. We must be able to subsidize green industry. It could be legitimate, but if it consists with climate benefits, then the WTO needs to look into this. We need to place a tariff on coal like the EU. That's not to commit trade discrimination, but it needs to be done consistently with the goal of zero carbon by 2050. It should not be an instrument to block trade, but it needs to be verified. And we also need to liberalize trade of environmental assets instead of pollutant assets to allow the energy and environmental transition to take place much more quickly. Fourthly, no one should have to choose between combating poverty and the struggle for the climate. This mini-revolution, which we launched a few months ago back in Paris, is the Paris Pact for people on the planet. We shouldn't have to choose between climate and combating poverty. Everyone should be able to choose their own path. More public money is needed. We need to mobilize more private money. In 6 months from now, there'll be a 6-month review that will be published during this COP. Macky Sall, the special envoy for the pact, will come with the Secretariat, but already we've managed to mobilize much more money together by mobilizing the IMF and World Bank. I thank them. I invite all those who have not yet done so to redistribute their special drawing rights from the IMF. We've already managed to mobilize $110 billion that will allow us to launch in 11 countries today special programs, and those programs will allow us to prevent climate incidents and to combat poverty. We need to generalize this, and it's that commitment of a greater mobilization that we've launched with the Prime Minister Modi. All this more broadly must lead us towards a transformation of the very international financial architecture that was thought of at a time when many of the countries, present in many of the countries in this room, didn't even exist at the time. So we need to rekindle hope to make it truly inclusive, and this profound transformation of our governance is a priority. Now, one thing I want to stress, we must lose sight of the need for adaptation of agricultural models, particularly in Africa, is a key subject. The Great Green Wall is making progress. I'm very pleased about that, and we shouldn't lose sight of that object, where we've mobilized more than 30 million euros together with King Charles. And we also announced an investment of 150 million euros in the next cycle of the International Fund for Agricultural Development. I want to urge here all countries present to participate in December in the replenishment of that fund, which will play a key role in reconciling the agricultural goal and the climate goal. And that is a crucial struggle, because we cannot ask the African countries to choose between the two, between agricultural production or climate. We need both with sustainable models, and the Ukrainian war has shown us that this model is unsustainable, because many countries need fertilizer, and so we must help them so they can produce more at home, but at a much more decarbonized level without coal. And all this is a key element, and that's the agenda that we'll be launching with Kazakhstan tomorrow. It's called One Planet, on the issue of water, to be held in September. I welcome the progress made during this COP, President, when it comes to loss and damage. France will be financing 100 million euros based on governance elements, pending decisions on this subject. But I want to stress a number of points here, because the debate has really stepped up in Sharm el-Sheikh on loss and damage. Thanks very much to my friend Mia Motley, who did outstanding work. But we need to be careful on this issue on a number of points. First of all, let's not confuse the situation of low-income countries and poor countries. We need this fund, but first it must go to the poorest countries above all. We need above all profound reform of our insurance and reinsurance system, given in the face of climate risk, and this for the middle-income countries that need it. That fund must allow us to carry out that reform, to have a buffer, a guarantee, but we must have mechanisms between which we can distinguish depending on the category of country. I'll say that straight away. We need a simple form of governance. We also need a country-by-country approach. For example, we'll be establishing a first-country partnership on adaptation and loss and damage with Bangladesh. France will invest 1 billion euros So much more than we're putting into the fund now, because that is a specific country approach. We'll invest $1 billion. The IMF will add close to $20 billion. Thanks to special drawing rights, and this is a key element of this laboratory we want to make on loss and damage. But what we need is an approach, a country-specific approach. Beyond that, we need for that true international taxation, and with Barbados, Kenya, and we are officially launching during this COP an international task force which will have to provide its findings to the G20 in Rio to place international taxation during COP30. That is a necessity that if we want to achieve real results, because we need to raise more money so as to finance a struggle against inequality and for climate. Finally, climate and biodiversity must be addressed together. Therefore, we must stress the fact that we must continue our struggle for nature. Forests, the oceans are part of our COP because they are carbon wells and a lever for extraordinary solutions in the transition. That is why I will take this opportunity to continue to establish, first of all, we need to accelerate when it comes to a real exchange on carbon. We want to invest much more private money to countries who preserve their forests and ecosystems. We raised this in Libreville at the start of the year. We'll conclude with Papua New Guinea, the Congo, the first national forest package. The idea being that we provide public and private loans to countries who save their forests, because we don't have that now. We put a lot of money into carrying out reforestation, but the developing countries, their forests are being destroyed to finance much more profitable economic activities. Therefore, there's an urgency to put money into those country-specific approaches and to have a shared methodology. And we'll be investing 500 million euros in the next 4 years in protecting forests following that methodology. And then the oceans are also a priority. It will be our honor to host the UN Conference on the Oceans in 2025. Our ambition there is to develop a real compact for the oceans with a very in-depth international rules to preserve in our EEZs, but also in the high seas, to protect biodiversity, to better regulate fisheries and to combat illegal fishing and reduce pollution at sea. So those are some of the key elements that I wanted to bring to you in this debate, which are both solutions, commitments on the part of France, and also concerns where we need to step up the common agenda. Thank you very much, President, for your attention. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
That was French President Emmanuel Macron speaking there live from the COP28 summit that is ongoing in Dubai. France 24's Valérie Decamp is reporting from that conference. Valérie, you just listened, as we did, to Emmanuel Macron. He made some interesting announcements regarding funding for environmental initiatives. What else did he say?
He talked a lot about climate solidarity, this notion that developing countries should not choose between battling poverty and battling the climate crisis. He also talked a lot about adaptation and how we can help African countries in particular really adapt to the consequences of the climate crisis, especially when it comes to agriculture. And he also devoted a big chunk of his speech to energy and the energy transition, specifically coal. He said that existing coal-fired power plants would push the world beyond the 1.5 degree limit set by the Paris Agreement. And we know that during his trip to Dubai, Emmanuel Macron, he really wants to focus on two main themes when it comes to energy: coal, reducing coal capacity, and nuclear energy, ramping up nuclear energy. The Élysée Palace says that France really wants to take a pragmatic approach when it comes to energy during this COP. The country, France, is part of what we call the High Ambition Coalition, so a group of countries that really want to push hard for a fossil fuel phase out. No ifs, no buts. But they are very much aware as well that pushing for that fossil fuel phase out will be a very tough sell. And so they want to have this more pragmatic approach and support maybe more of a coal phase down or a coal phase out. That is why Macron wants to focus on nuclear energy and coal. Nuclear energy because we know that it is a low carbon source of energy. France is already a nuclear champion. 75% of the country's energy comes from nuclear power, and they want to be that champion as well on the global stage. France would like to see a commitment to triple nuclear energy by 2050, and for developing nations to use nuclear energy to essentially move away from fossil fuels. And coal, why does he want to talk about coal? Because there is more momentum potentially for a coal phase out. Already at COP26, countries agreed on phasing down unabated coal capacity, and so that process has already been going, and there is more momentum for coal. So again, France wanting to take a more pragmatic approach when it comes to energy here at COP28.
Thank you so much for that latest update. Valérie Descamps reporting there live.